Hello, my name is Maude Morin. I'm a registered dietitian with JM Nutrition, and today we're here to talk a little bit about stress and our diet. We're going to look at the connection between stress and our cortisol hormone. We're also going to talk about some foods that may increase and potentially help to manage our cortisol hormone circulating through the body. Now, you might be familiar with experiencing stress in your own life. It might bring up feelings in your physical body like tension or muscle aching or discomfort. It might also bring up some intestinal issues for you. For some people, the symptoms can be more emotional. Maybe we become more irritable, a little bit more anxious or overwhelmed. And some stress in our day-to-day life is to be expected and can be quite normal. But when stress becomes prolonged, so chronic without times of relaxation, all of these physical and emotional problems can multiply and become much worse. So for instance, we might see more constant chronic pain. We also might see intestinal issues develop into something like irritable bowel or IBS. Emotionally, some people are prone to developing anxiety or depression that may be diagnosed in clinic, and that would be a more extreme case of really long-term stressors or very poorly managed stress when we have maybe too much going on. Stress in the modern day can really come from a number of different sources. We have physical stressors, like maybe we're being attacked by a grizzly bear out in the woods. We might also have emotional stressors, strains on our relationships, or intellectual stressors, like maybe deadlines at work or difficulties with our finances. The challenge is that your body physically doesn't really distinguish the difference between needing to run away from a wild animal and dealing with things that are a bit more emotional or intellectual, which means that our response is going to be very similar. What's happening is your brain is sending messages to release cortisol and adrenaline into your system. This is the fight or flight response that you may have heard of before. This fight or flight response is going to act on a number of different organ systems to make your body really strong, really full of fuel, and breathing more quickly, sweating more heavily. All of this was designed for us to be able to fight for our lives or flight, run away from danger. Unfortunately, those physical situations can definitely stick around when our mental or intellectual stresses are with us, but we're not releasing that response. We're not choosing to deal with that stress by running away or fighting back. This might be why under times of stress, if you're still able to maintain your exercise routine, like going to the gym, you find this to be a really good stress reducer, is because we're physically pumping that cortisol hormone, using it up and making sure that we're deactivating that fight or flight response after a pretty hard workout. Now, if we turn our attention to the types of foods that might increase our cortisol, the first thing to observe is caffeine. Now, you might be a person who drinks coffee or tea. It helps you to feel a bit stimulated, a bit more energized. And the reason for that being that it acts on your nervous system, and it does actually involve the release of some cortisol in your body. Through its activity, cortisol will release things like glucose into your blood, which helps you to feel energized. And it's actually part of why we do want to be careful with our caffeine consumption. Since caffeine does contribute to the release of some cortisol into your system, how much caffeine you consume and at what time of day can be really important. Our top nutrition tips for drinking caffeine would be to keep it early in the day and make sure that you're giving yourself lots of room to clear it out before you go to bed each night, and that we're not exceeding the recommendations for caffeine intake in a day, which should be about 3 cups of coffee or so. Now, it's not to say that you have to drink that many, but it's a really good rule of thumb to try and limit it to about that much. Now, another food group that might be a bit problematic comes from what we've just heard, which is that cortisol can actually contribute to increasing glucose circulating in our bloodstream. You can think about this as blood sugar. For that reason, carbohydrates that are highly refined or foods that have a lot of added sugar are going to potentially increase that cortisol response as well. It's a bit of a vicious cycle. When we have a lot of that energy pumping through our bloodstream, we might run the risk of releasing a bit more cortisol into our body to help deal with all of that. Cortisol naturally has the job of helping your body decide what type of energy it's going to be using. So carbohydrate energy, protein energy, and even fat energy, depending on what you're doing and what the energy demands are that you're placing on your body. What's particularly challenging about carbohydrates and sugary foods is that when we're stressed, oftentimes we start to have cravings for these kinds of things. And that can be explained because your brain uses more energy when you're stressed, which means that we're oftentimes looking for really quick and easy access sources of sugar for energy for the brain. So you might find yourself going through a drive-through when you're more stressed and getting a little snack that you might not normally be eating as part of your routine. One of the things that we can do to help prevent these types of cravings under times of stress is to make sure that we're still eating regularly, not skipping any meals, and making sure that our meals and snacks are pretty balanced, which means that we're looking to have some type of protein and ideally some source of fiber from whole grains, fruits, vegetables, to make sure that we're feeling satiated when we eat. Now, if we start to look at foods that might help you under times of stress, foods that help to manage your cortisol levels, the first nutrient that's important to discuss is magnesium. So you may have heard of magnesium. It's become fairly popular as a supplement because a lot of people tend to run a little bit lower in magnesium. Now, if you're the type of person who has a really plant-rich, whole foods diet, you probably don't need to worry about your magnesium levels, while the rest of us sometimes need to work a little bit harder to make sure that we're meeting those needs. Now, magnesium is really important because it has around 300 jobs in the human body, and a lot of these processes are going to be activated when your cortisol level is high or when you're in fight or flight. What's kind of interesting is that people who are lower in magnesium tend to experience their stress a bit more strongly, which means that less magnesium means more overwhelm, means more stress, which means we're actually using more magnesium. So this is a bit of a vicious cycle as well. Now, to make sure that we're meeting our magnesium needs, we can do as I just said, which is to focus on a plant-rich, whole foods diet. There are a lot of excellent sources of magnesium in our diet, like whole grains, beans and lentils. Nuts and seeds can be particularly rich, with pumpkin seeds being a standout. We can even use things like dark chocolate and bananas to supplement our diet with magnesium-rich foods. You might consider adding a handful of nuts, maybe as a snack in the afternoon. You can have a piece of dark chocolate with that if you're looking for something a little bit sweet, particularly if you're feeling a little bit more stressed. You might find that energy is a little bit lower and that you're craving a bit more of that sweetness or a bit more of that natural sugar. Now, our next two helpful components have to do with fighting inflammation in the body. When your body is highly stressed and we have all of these functions that are going on overdrive because of the fight or flight response, what's happening as part of the energy production in the system is that we might produce something called free radicals. Free radicals are a byproduct of metabolism. They happen in a lot of our cells. It's actually a natural process in the human body, but these free radicals can actually be quite damaging to our organs, cells, and tissues, which means that we need to make sure we eat food components to stabilize them. When they cause damage, we refer to this as oxidative stress. Now, I know it can sound a little bit scary, but it's the type of thing that your body is going to produce. Just being exposed to pollution, maybe in a city, as well as sunshine, we can produce free radicals just as a result of breathing. And so it's not something that we can necessarily stop doing, but it's something that we can work to stabilize. Our best food sources to stabilize free radicals are called antioxidants. Antioxidants are found primarily in plant-based foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, even things like green tea. The one we're going to focus on today is vitamin C, also sometimes called ascorbic acid. Now, you might be pretty familiar with vitamin C from citrus fruits maybe, but there's a lot of other dietary sources that you could try to include to make sure you're getting a good amount of vitamin C each day. Balancing our plate around 50% with fruits and vegetables with our main meals each day is a really great practice to incorporate more of these foods. Some specific examples would be things like kiwis, strawberries, and of course citrus fruits, but there's also vitamin C in lots of vegetables like bell peppers, cauliflower, and broccoli, which we can work into our meal plan in lots of different ways. Now, vitamin C is going to help stabilize the free radicals, but what can we do if the damage has already been done, that oxidative stress has already started? What we can do is actually promote repair through consumption of foods that help fight and repair from inflammation. One example of this would be omega-3 fatty acids. Now, you might be familiar with omega-3 fatty acids in the form of fish oil or a supplement from the store, but we can find omega-3 fatty acids naturally occurring, of course, in the fatty fishes that they use to make these supplements. The recommended guideline for eating fatty fishes would be 2 to 3 servings per week that are about the size of your palm. And we want to be getting things like salmon, trout, sardines, mackerel, herring, or Arctic char into our diet. Now, if you follow a diet that is only plants, like vegetarian or vegan, you might look into a supplement for this that is from vegetarian sources to make sure that you're still getting some of these omega-3 fats in your routine. Now, there are actually some plant-based sources of omega-3s as well, like walnuts, flax seeds, and chia seeds, for example, but the quantities can be quite low for most people and don't really meet our needs unless we're very careful with the planning in the quantities that we consume of these seeds. Now, because stress can be particularly draining emotionally, it can help to make sure that we're meeting our nutritional needs for vitamins that help to support mental health. One of the main ones that we look at here in North America is vitamin D status. Because we don't get as much sun exposure for a good part of the year, it really helps to get these levels checked and to add a supplement if that's warranted for you. Now, some people are able to maintain their vitamin D just through food alone, but it can take a bit of careful planning. If you're a person who doesn't eat those fatty fishes that we talked about for our omega-3s, it's not really going to be something that might be feasible for you. Those are some of our best dietary sources of vitamin D3. Now, another thing that really helps us is B vitamins. Vitamin B12 in particular is connected to sources of energy, mood stability. We might also look for things like folate or vitamin B6 in terms of making sure that we have mental or emotional resilience. Now, B vitamins are found pretty widely throughout our diet through whole foods like proteins, both plant and animal, whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. So it comes back to this idea of us eating a balanced diet, but also practicing a balanced plate with our main meals. B vitamins in proteins particularly can be really interesting to concentrate on. Protein does help to stabilize our appetite. So if you're prone to having cravings, when you're more stressed, it can be really handy to incorporate protein with all of your meals and snacks. Now, eating regularly, getting protein and other sources of whole foods like fiber, we want to be looking at having this every maybe 2 to 3 hours, maybe 3 to 4 hours. It's going to depend on how often you get hungry and what your needs are physically. If you're very active, of course, it might look a bit different than someone who's a bit more sedentary. We all would like to see ourselves feeling less stressed, and that can make us particularly susceptible to trying things like supplements when maybe we don't need them. There are a few really popular ones that are circulating right now that in some clinical trials have been connected with reducing stress. Magnesium, which we touched on already, is one of those supplements. It's really only going to be helpful for you if you don't eat enough magnesium in your diet. Now, with that being said, it's generally quite safe to try, so many people give it a shot and see if it improves how they feel overall and if they notice their symptoms of stress reducing. Now, another option would be something like adaptogens. We've seen a lot of information online about ashwagandha, for example. Now, this is a little bit more of an herbal supplement. It does have some interactions with medications, and so it could be really helpful to discuss any type of herbal supplement with your own healthcare providers, like your doctor or your pharmacist, just to make sure that it's something that's safe for you to try if you're curious about giving a go to adaptogens. We also see a lot of information circulating about a turmeric supplement. Now, turmeric or its active ingredient curcumin are thought to be potentially helpful in managing stress because they help your body to fight inflammation. So if we think back to our vitamin C conversation, it can help to stabilize and maybe even repair some of the damage that we do under times of really elevated or chronic stress. Now, you can add curcumin to your diet by incorporating turmeric more regularly in your cooking. Maybe we want to add a quarter teaspoon or so ideally kind of like on a daily or every other day type of basis. That would be increasing your frequency quite a bit. But some people find it easier to look for a supplement. Kind of like the adaptogens, because this is a root, we definitely want to make sure that we're checking for any interactions with medications that we might be taking. It's always good practice when we're looking or considering supplements for our routine to discuss with our doctor, nurse practitioner, or pharmacist to make sure that it's the right choice for you. Now, to conclude our video today, I just want to remind you that no amount of eating perfectly can reduce stress in your life if it's there. We definitely want to also practice stress management, self-care, maybe having social connections to help deal with our stressors, or finding ways to reduce the stressors in general. If you feel like you might need some additional support, perhaps mental health counseling could be something that you look into if you feel like you don't have the best coping mechanisms in your life for dealing with the stressors that you face. Now, nutrition can definitely help you to feel better through times of stress, and it makes your physical body a lot more resilient to some of the possible physical and emotional symptoms that can pop up. This is particularly true if your stress kind of comes and goes and you have highs and lows like we all do. Now, if you've been dealing with stress for a long time and you're finding it particularly difficult to meet your nutritional needs, or you have goals that are difficult to balance with meal planning, meal prepping, and your time constraints, you can feel free to reach out to us, maybe get matched with a dietitian that can support you along the way.